My name is Margaret Burgin. I work for the BBC, and my current title is quite a long one. It's Senior Schools Outreach Manager, and that means I'm running a BBC journalism project called BBC News School Report that works with about 1,000 schools and 50,000 children. We have an annual news day, which this year is on the 16th of March. I think it's something I always wanted to do. I was always really good at English. When I was at school, they didn't really teach media. But I'd always been really interested, and I thought I wanted to be a newspaper journalist to begin with. But then I ended up not doing that, and I don't quite know why. But I started off working for the BBC, doing film research in the film library quite a long time ago. Personal journey. Well, I did start that job, the film research job for the BBC. Then I did some film research for a few programmes. But then I worked for BBC Worldwide for a while, which is a bit of the BBC that a lot of people don't know about. So that they sell BBC programmes overseas. I worked with them for a few years. And then I stopped and had some children and moved north, which isn't a very good thing to do, I don't suppose. But then I did various other jobs, but I started working with the BBC again in local radio in Sheffield, which is where I live. And then I did journalism training on the job kind of while I was looking at it while my kids were little, and I was a broadcast journalist for quite a long time there. And I got really interested in community journalism. We used to have a fleet then of BBC buses that used to go out into the community and broadcast, and I managed one of those in Sheffield. So I was really on the community side, and then I started doing a lot of BBC projects like Who Do You Think You Are, which you will know. We did a Millennium Project. We did a lot of sort of community storytelling projects. There isn't too much of that left now, although Radio 4 still does the listening project, so I was really interested in all of that. And then I worked for School Report before, when we came up north in 2007. And I also did all the outreach engagement for this site in Salford, which is BBC Media. We're at Media City, so I had a little bit of funding for 2 or 3 years after we moved in to go out into the community and make connections and that sort of thing, just to make sure we were being corporately, socially responsible, I think. Yes, it is. I think in Salford here it's very different to some of the rest of the BBC, but if you look at our statistics, we're more or less equal, men and women, as a workforce, but as you go up the grades, as you get more senior, there are more men than women. I mean, we count this. We're quite open about it. The figures are published. And we do have some quite stringent targets for 2020 for diversity for LGBT, BAME, and for men and women at senior grades, and for people with disabilities. So we've got quite strict targets. In Salford, we're nearly there. We're really quite a diverse workforce generally. But the rest of the BBC isn't so much. But we have got really good targets, yeah. And you generally find that people who volunteer and say, I'll do that, I'll have a go at that, do really well. And you've got to be able to survive and work freelance and sometimes do jobs that you don't like. But if you're in the industry, you get to do some really brilliant stuff. I've done some amazing stuff. I've managed CBeebies events, which is about the most fun you can have. I've produced a few CBeebies events. But then you have periods of time when you're doing something that you don't quite like as much, but you kind of want to stay in the industry. So, and I also think that with technology, you've got to be very adaptable. So I've been a journalist, I've sold television programmes, I've managed events, I've managed big projects, I've taught journalism, and that's just one career. And I think anybody, you've got to be really adaptable. Otherwise you just, and quite tough, otherwise you just don't get on. But there's some wonderful opportunities for people now, really, but you've just got to be really adaptable, and you've got to put yourself out there. You've got to be on LinkedIn, you've got to make contacts, you've got to know all the independent companies and who hires for them and all that sort of thing. It's really quite hard, but it's quite fun. On this site as well at Media City, there are 3,500 BBC staff, but there's another 3,000 media staff. There's Salford University, big media department. There are a lot of small independent companies in this area now. There's the University Technical College that teaches media across the road. There's such a lot going on around here. And about half now the dramas made out of London are made in Manchester, for that very reason, because it's cheaper and There's some really, good production. It's a really good place to produce media and drama and all sorts of things now. So it's a really popular place, Manchester. But it is, and an awful lot of people do a media degree and then don't get a job in the industry. They end up doing something else. And it is possible to get in, but it is quite hard work. Because if you're an engineer, somebody might give you a postgraduate scheme with a car or something, and at the BBC or an independent production company, somebody will give you a 3-month contract, and that's good. So it is much harder. But once you get going with that and you meet a lot of people, most good freelancers are very rarely out of work.